Anisha.
I'm Sia.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Trisha.
We're four friends who talk about what's going on in the economy and why it matters. No buzzwords, no lecture, just a straight up conversation. In today's episode, we're going to discuss about India's education policies. For today's episode, we have a special guest, Miss Sanjana Nair. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sanjana, and I am a UG student in Manipal, pursuing economics and political science. So it's basically a double degree course, making it an interdisciplinary course. And I think the theme for today kind of is pretty good for my course. So yeah.
Yes, we'd love to hear your expertise on the topic. So we can start off by talking about how policies are implemented and what is their how they come into existence.
So I think a policy is basically drafted in terms of a lot of steps. In our course, we looked into five different steps, which was agenda setting, then there was policy formulation, policy adoption, implementation, and finally there would be evaluation. So you can also kind of shorten it to agenda setting, drafting, and finally evaluation as well. So I think in this space, what you call agenda setting is that you recognize the problem or you make the government aware of the problem, which we saw recently after the NEET paper leaks. And what kind of makes this a problem is that it's mostly reactive, in the sense that there needs to be something that happens in order to set this policy formulation in motion, and it's never inward thinking that happens. So in terms of drafting and decision making, I think it's pretty self-explanatory in the sense that committees are formed and bureaucrats and experts kind of sit down and they start evaluating the data, they start negotiating, and they kind of try to design the best policy. And here again, the problem is that they do not try to design a policy which could survive in that particular political environment, which is what happened, I believe, it's my personal opinion, which is what happened with the NEET paper leaks. And then the last problem or the last step that we have is evaluation, which again was another problem which happened with the current NEP 2020 and the NEET paper leaks. So yeah.
What I
Hannah, go.
understand from all the steps that you've gone through is that the agenda setting is a major problem because the government will never initiate any change unless there is some serious riot or issue that is taking place within the public. So that is like a kind of a negative within our education policy setting within India itself.
Yeah, so that being a problem, one of the main things that I thought about when I revised the curriculum that I had last semester was that these steps kind of remind me of this thing called the systems theory by David Easton, where there are inputs and there are outputs. And these inputs are basically demands from the people and the support that the people give, and the government kind of makes these into policies and decisions, right? And this happens within the internal environment and the external environment. Here, the problem is that in terms of agenda setting, like I mentioned, it's a reactive measure and not a proactive measure. And in terms of the systems theory that I mentioned, proactive measures are very important. Otherwise, the system does not work well. So in this particular systems theory, there's this feedback loop sort of thing where after there's an initiation in terms of decision making or policies, a feedback loop is sort of formed from the people. And if this is not taken into consideration, again, the system fails. This, I think, can be very much seen or it's very evident in the current situation, which is, again,
Absolutely.
the protests and the NEET paper leaks. And like you mentioned, it is the main problem. Agenda setting is definitely the main problem. And I don't think the current government is looking into it at all. But yeah.
So what this makes me question is the education segment an issue because this is not their major voting bank, right? Because these policies apply to students under the age of 18 where they are not voting. So that needs to be considered, and maybe that is why it's a reactive measure that becomes an issue.
Um, could you repeat the question again? I'm so sorry.
No, so what I was trying to infer is that because the education measures apply to students below the age of 18, which are not a major voting bank for the government, it becomes an issue that they don't try to change it or don't try to create a newer policy because it doesn't directly affect their standing in the government.
Yeah, that could be the problem. But at the same time, I think it could also point towards how inadequate the system is currently. So maybe they should look into changes which are structural and not something that is symbolic, let's say.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, so if they have to consider, to answer your question, I think um, let's say we are 18-year-olds and
Hmm.
they are not considering us. The mistake they're making is we grow past 18 and we are the voting bank right now.
Hmm.
If they do not end up considering us, they're not going to get any votes. And I don't, with the protests that are going on right now, they have lost quite a lot of votes. So, yeah, they should probably look into that. But it's much more than the voting bank, is what I think.
Okay.
Because education is supposed to be one of the most top priorities.
Hmm.
And as for the voting bank goes, these kids still have parents, right? The parents see how the kids are affected, and then they would make their decision accordingly. So yeah,
I think the current protests have kind of brought in
like
a lot of
a lot
sense
of
into a
that.
lot of
Hmm.
adults
Yeah.
who are blindly following certain parties and institutions. And I think that's a huge step for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
It's
We have
just
it.
a sign of how ironically voting is a byproduct of literacy itself. The more literate you are, the right decision you make, which is why education is again so important.
And we're probably likely to see some change because, like, it's proven that we're able to take some action, like against the government that way.
I think CJP has kind of brought in this unity among
It's true.
unity among people. And right now, even though they've kind of stepped back, there's still that unity that exists, and people are moving forward with more issues that they are coming across and which are present. And yeah, something like the protest should continue in order to achieve structural changes. So yeah.
So, stemming from this, we can discuss about the actual policy crisis in education in India right now that the CJP or this protest was trying to solve. The major one being the type of exam NET and JER.
I think NET and JEE were kind of designed to measure ability, and it kind of was supposed to measure how much the person has understood the material, whether they can apply it. But let me just bring in a little bit of statistics into it. For NEET UG 2026, there were around 1.3 lakh MBBS seats nationally, with government seats kind of taking up less than half of that percentage, which is around 60 to 65K, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And in the recent cycles, over 20 lakh students have sat the exam. So if you look at the 1.3 lakh seats and the 20 lakh students have sat the exam, it kind of starts, the test kind of starts functioning like a filter or maybe even a lottery ticket that you have very low chances of winning. And the success rates have kind of shown that it's around only 6 to 7%. that's probably my point, in the sense that they should change it. They should kind
Yeah.
of multi-level system maybe, and not just put
I feel
students in. Yeah, continue.
I feel like now, even with these exams, right, there are so many coaching centers that have come up, and they sort of try to profit off of these exams by having like full quotas. Like they have the accommodation fees, and they tend to charge pretty high prices depending on their results. But what these coaching centers actually do to students, that is not always considered. Usually they're described as very demotivating because they often have like star batches, and they usually sort of attach a number to students' worth. So it tends to get really demotivating, and a lot of parents tend to ignore this.
Yeah, additionally, I'd also like to add that these coaching centers are extremely expensive and
Yeah.
very geographically concentrated, which kind of make it kind of it's only accessible to a certain bracket of people.
Those without the resources from maybe like rural areas, they're not able to compete with people from more like metro cities.
We also see, like you talk about geographically concentrated, we can use the example of Kota, where it is just a full city filled with tuition centers for JEE, which again makes it less accessible. And second is the pressure that comes on students from these kind of places is immense, that doesn't get essentially recognized by parents due to the social pressure of getting into IIT. And
Yeah.
the benefits that come from it, obviously, but the difficulty level of it has increased to such a level that the pressure is not being considered anymore.
I feel like a lot of parents also don't know how intense the competition is. Like Sanjana pointed out, the success rate is like up like a little over 5%. And this is just really not considered. And yeah, the pressure they put on, it's like impossible almost to get into these institutions.
But I do have a question. Do you think that the government has allotted these number of seats, like 1.3 lakh, I think you said, for NEET? Do you think that that is allotted according to the requirement of labor in that sector within the country? Do you think that's less or appropriate for the kind of allocation of the number of doctors or engineers that are required? So, do you think that these courses are somewhere overpopulated as well?
So we know that in a country like India, the major um, the the jobs that people mostly go after are engineering, medicine, and the legal sector, maybe. And and over time, this has kind of increased, especially the demand for doctors in India has increased. So the thing is, the number of people who have been taking the exams have increased like significantly. But at the same time, even though the seats that have been given have increased, they're not in track with the number of people that are taking the exams. So, like I mentioned, it's like taking a lottery ticket, and these tickets have like very low chances of winning. So personally, I don't think that the seats that have been given are enough, especially the government seats, which are again less than half of what the number of seats totally are. And NEET exams, I don't think are very much taken into consideration in private institutions where the fees is extremely high. It kind of goes even to crores. And so maybe we should look into making the number of seats a little better, or maybe even, like I mentioned, maybe have a multiple examination technique instead of having it like once in a year, or because that kind of puts a lot of pressure into students. Like it's not as easy as parents think it is. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, having it multiple times a year, it's so easy to then do a retake. Like, suppose you don't have to waste an entire year, not waste, but you don't have to spend an entire year preparing for the same thing if you know you haven't given it your best shot. Like, this was not the best paper you've done. You have to wait an entire year so that
Yeah.
becomes really unfair to the students.
Yeah.
And I feel like if there
So,
are more sittings, more students can spread out equally. Like compared to everyone competing during one single time and then that turning out into a filter.
If I'm not wrong, examinations like GRE, GMAT, and SATs are in that manner in the sense there are multiple sittings, which kind of help reduce the pressure. If I fail right now, I can take it maybe a couple of months later, which,
Even CA.
yeah,
Yeah. There's also the problem that a lot of people will be entering the labor market as well late. So it's kind of delaying them as well, right? Because they'll be wasting, I mean, not like they'll be spending more time just trying to clear one exam.
so another major flaw with the Indian education system is the board disparities that exist. Like the state board system was invented when the states were separated into their original entities, and then the ICSE system and the CBSE system started. But now it is creating a disparity in terms of entrance exams.
yeah. So I think this kind of makes the system even less fairer in the sense that the system is not in a level playing field, like you mentioned. India runs in like a mix of school boards such as central board and then individual state boards, and the catch is that central board kind of the syllabi runs with an eye towards the national entrance exams, and they are kind of being trained their entire lives for this exam. But at the same time, state board students are not do not have the same privilege, and at the end they kind of are measured against the exact same yardstick, which is not really fair. So this is also again a problem with the system, and the policy definitely needs to change.
And even when we look at boards in the sense international boards or private universities, if you look at the UK, almost 97 to 99% of the students sit for the GCSEs, which is why all of these students are eligible to go into all of their well known universities. Whereas in India, there are so many different divisions. There's CBSE, SE, SSE, ICSE, and then there's these international boards. So it gives an edge to I wouldn't want to say rich, but like well-to-do families, higher earning families, because then if you're inherently rich, you can just get into a better university, even if you're not as qualified or deserving as someone who doesn't have that much wealth to get into that kind of a university. So that's unfair.
So then this just
But in
further
our
increases the income gap because these students who get into good universities will are more likely to get into high paying jobs, right? Because they have that reputation they can plaster on their CV. So then this just further increases the gap.
an argument for the multi-tiered board system could also be that because the population of India is so high, especially the youth population, um, creating a policy that is fair for everyone in all the states and controlling that system will also be difficult to first come up with and have a efficient system and then implement it as well, which will take years into the future. But it has to start somewhere.
That's to start.
Yeah, there's this thing called incrementalism by, if I'm not wrong, his name is pronounced as Lindblom. The theorist's name is pronounced as Lindblom. Incrementalism is basically where changes are kind of brought in systematically, in the sense it's brought in slowly. And this is where I think I'd like to mention the national education policy of 2020. It kind of brought in a lot of changes all of a sudden. Yeah, so instead of bringing it all together, maybe what they should have done was that they could bring in small policies slowly, like I mentioned,
Hmm.
a way of incrementalism. That could be like a measure or a suggestion that can be made into future policy changes, which I hope are undergoing right now. Um, but yeah, that's probably one of my suggestions.
So I would like to give an example for this. So during my 10th, they decided the NEP was implemented for ICSC. So what happened was we were the first year to give competency-based questions. but our whole education system till 10th was based essentially on the concept of rote memorization or more leading towards that. So during a board exam, coming up with a new policy so immediately and then asking us to apply it was a bit unfair. Like what you said, it should have come eventually, starting from maybe eighth grade, seventh grade, and then asked us to write a board exam on that.
For students who have been trained to maybe take the boards later in life, I think, like you mentioned, it was all of a sudden, and you weren't even given an opportunity to look into it or maybe adjust to it, which is unfair in terms of the students' perspective. And in terms of, I think, the teacher's perspective, they were also not trained well
Yeah.
to adjust with it because it's been, I think the board system has been there for around 30 years now. The 10
Yes.
plus 2 plus 3 system. And the NEP 2020 brought in the 5 plus 3 plus 3 system, which is, again, which was all of a sudden.
But do you
Even
think that do you think having an incremental system, do you think that would slow down progress? Then people may complain that the government is doing too little, too less to actually fix the root issue.
No matter what you do, there will be complaints. But the thing is, if you bring it up all together, like the government did, what happens is what we are currently seeing now. Right now, I think is a live case study of what we can um, take as a lesson, or the government can take as a lesson in terms of what to do. And I think incrementalism, I'm not talking about taking 20 years and like bringing changes every 5 years. Maybe plan it well and bring in ministers that are competent, who can do the job well. Um, no shade to anyone, but yeah. Um, so maybe bring in policies, let's say every 2 years. I don't think that's a huge thing to ask for.
yeah.
Um, maybe have like a point, maybe have a policy like a statement sort of thing, and then implement it every 2 years or bring in changes every 2 years so that people can get used to it and they know that, okay, this is going to happen. So let's start preparing now. So that's what I think I meant by incrementalism.
So moving on to essentially another policy crisis is what we call a gold rush phenomenon, where because India's development has created a path more towards the service sector, there is a employment disparity between either very high paying jobs or low paying jobs. So
I think because
as
of
my
that, sorry.
no, go on.
Yeah, I think because of that, definitely the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer phenomenon is going on. It's getting worse as the years go by. And I think one of the main points that I'd like to mention in this mismatch of labor opportunities and educational structures is that entry level positions right now require years of prior work experience, which is not kind of feasible because if I want a job next year after graduating, that's not possible because how am I going to have like 2 years of work experience while I'm working? And it's not even part time, they need like full time work experience. So it's a cycle that's kind of going on, and this has reduced labor market opportunities for students who are graduates. Um, and one point I'd like to mention is that India has kind of become a service driven industry or a country. And it kind of there's this article that I read by Parikshit Ghosh in Economic Times, and he kind of mentioned that um, if I'm not wrong, he mentioned the East Asian economies like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, and how they welcomed kind of foreign capital by retaining strategic control over industries. And they also kind of attracted foreign investment by creating a large labor pool. That did not happen in India in the sense that manufacturing industry was not focused on as much as services were focused on. And that again widened the labor market gap and the educational structures that we have currently. So at the end, you end up with like a thin layer at the top with like a high paying corporate job and like a government job, and then a very large, insecure kind of low paying job sector. And there's not a lot in between that.
So also I feel like because the basically the demand because the demand for people in the service sector has reduced, people who are already trained to work in the sector are like the middlemen who are getting left out and don't have job security anymore.
I think currently India is definitely going through a jobless growth kind of situation, and I don't know if the growth is happening also. But again, all of this kind of goes back to education and employment opportunities not being there. And I think the main point that the author of the article that I read was that gold rush is the disease and paper leaks is the symptom of it, which I find very interesting and insightful. So if you can, or if you have the opportunity, give it a read. It's pretty good.
So the recent controversies about the paper leaks exposed a very vulnerable issue in the central testing agencies like the NTA. So obviously the youth-led protests by CJP, they suggested certain policy changes. So we could discuss about those and give our thoughts.
CGP kind of had 5 points or 5 suggestions that they had, which I don't exactly remember, but I think it's basically about um, increasing the punishment for paper leaks and having a proper um, body or a group to kind of look into this matter. And um, one of the major critical points, I think, which I read or which I went through was that if you have more committees, it kind of brings in a much more, again, it becomes long. The entire process of the entire paper leaking um, issue and the um, punishment that needs to be given, all of that kind of becomes much longer. So I think in terms of um, the suggestions, it needs to be slightly more structural, like I said, and not symbolic. And there needs to be much more thought put into it. And it kind of can't be scrunched down into like 5 major points. And, you know, it needs to be slightly more broader in order for us to kind of identify the problem. Um, I think,
So
yeah, go ahead.
So when you talk like you said about committees, another point I wanted to mention was also getting in students or current or recent students who have experienced what is actually happening or what kind of pressure they're facing to also have their opinions presented, because current committees in government, I presume, are mostly ministers or experienced teachers, right? But they don't firsthand know how a student reacts and what a student is facing with the exam preparation. So that could be a structural change that needs to be implemented.
Another change that could happen is maybe leveling the playing field, like I mentioned. The point that you said earlier about the state and the central board. Um, there could be like a national core curriculum which does
Mm,
not kind of have sections that are disadvantaged. And they
mm,
could be trained from early on to, if they plan on taking the national entrance exam, they could be trained early on. And
mm,
alongside that, I think they could kind of look into moving away from the rote memorization process
yeah,
that's currently going on, and look into critical thinking and application of the things that they learn. So that could be
yeah,
one suggestion.
Also, I think maybe like regulating prices for like coaching centers, because it's too high, right? Like a lot, it's I think in lakhs you have to pay to really get like the best of coaching centers. So that could be another like change they could implement.
One of the suggestions by CJP was also physical evaluations, which is under argument but makes sense. Like when we saw about the recent CBSE results for boards, they had many mistakes. And when rechecked, there was a huge gap between the result they actually got and the result that they were supposed to get. So which also creates a lot of mental pressure for students because you have prepared a whole year for it and it is such a big deal with like social pressures as well. And getting a low result when you don't deserve it is a huge issue. So that needs to be considered. But I think that issue also exists with physical evaluations, where if a teacher is not in a good mood, or it depends on your luck. But yeah, so that is something that needs to be regulated better if they want to implement online checking.
Yeah, I
But I
think the
don't think
problem. Yeah, please go ahead.
no, and I was just saying that even the staff, I don't think were really trained to be checking online yet. And they started this with 12th graders, which I don't think was like a good move. Like because this their marks matter for their colleges and all, right? Yeah.
I think the major problem was that the entire OSM system was kind of outsourced from another company, which I don't really remember the name of, but the problem was that there were a lot of scans which were not properly taken. There were a lot of technical glitches. Like you said, teachers were not properly trained to deal with such a huge shift, especially from physical to online. And this kind of definitely did impact the future of a lot of students. And I have friends who kind of had to deal with the same issue. Um, so I think maybe before outsourcing, they could check the credibility of the company, because this particular company was has also faced a lot of controversies before this. I think it's a Hyderabad-based company, if I'm not wrong, but um, the government should have definitely given, okay, so these are the requirements. If you do not fit into this, you're not gonna be outsourced from. So that could be a change. Okay, I think the online system was good, but preparatory measures were not taken properly. So
Hmm.
that could be one of the changes that I could suggest.
So another policy suggested was the age protections to not penalize candidates for their age limits or reduce their permissible attempts, because that having a limited time period in which you can pass an exam, also not giving enough preparation for any like unforeseen circumstances. So that also becomes an issue, which is I think a good policy that they've suggested.
I think the age limit thing kind of increases the pressure as well with students because they spend so much time, so many years and hours of dedication, and it kind of ends up with, okay, you have so many attempts within so much time. If not, you're like out of the entire process. So that is a pretty good change that they could bring up again after putting in enough thought. Um, so yeah, I
But
think
then
that's
again, doesn't it become unfair to like the younger ones who've had lesser time to prepare?
it does. But change should begin somewhere, right? Whatever happened is definitely not fair, especially with the deaths that have come up with the paper leaks, which is very saddening. And
Yeah.
that's probably the reason why the protests started in the first place. Um, but I think change should begin maybe with this policy, or maybe with some thought they could bring up some kind of good change. I'm not really sure because I don't have a suggestion for this. This is completely out of my, yeah.
They can draw inspiration from the CA exams, right? Because they do allow multiple attempts. But then obviously the later attempt that you give, the lesser opportunity that you get. So drawing like certain taking points from there and then implementing it, essentially doing proper research before implementing a policy.
Yeah.
That can be done.
I think the discussions that are going to happen between CGP and the ministers that they have said will happen um, should kind of have these as the talking points, maybe in terms of revamping the system, the structure of the examinations, and making it kind of student friendly in the sense that this, again, there's so much pressure that they go through, which I cannot think about. Like, I would not survive it. And like I said, there are people I know who have attempted NEET, and I was not able to talk to them. They would be living in hostels where, okay, their phones would be taken away and they'd be given it like once a week for like 1 hour. And that's so much pressure to put on a child, basically.
There's
So,
isolation as well.
sorry?
A lot of like they're very isolated from
Very
like
much
their
isolated.
yeah.
Yeah. So maybe let them have a social life where they can also work hard, which they will definitely if they want to. But,
I think
um,
a lot of the times it's not even like the student's decision to take this path, especially in our society. So then having all of these things imposed on them when it's not even their choice, it's like further makes it even worse.
Uh, so in today's episode, we started off by talking about how a policy is implemented or it comes into existence, listening to Sanjana's a theory of what they learn and the 5 steps that they use. Then we moved on to the policy crisis that currently exists in the Indian education system, like the gold rush phenomenon or the board disparities, and thinking, argumenting about the positives, negatives, and then moving on to the current controversy and the CJP led protest and the suggestions that they gave and how they should be implemented or how they should be effectively evaluated to create a better position for the education system in the future. Thank you so much, Sanjana, for giving us your valuable time and providing us with such insightful information about how a policy is made and the also the theory behind it. So thank you for your time. We
yeah.
appreciate it a lot.
If it's okay, can I add like one more small point, which I forgot to add earlier? I'm
Yeah,
so sorry
definitely.
if I'm taking up too much time. But just want to mention that the government has still not taken the responsibility or they've not been accountable for whatever has happened. And maybe that's the first step towards change. Um, and the resignation of Dharmendra Pradhan could have happened much earlier. And um, that's again not a structural change, it's just a symbolic change to
Yeah.
maybe shut people up, which they've pretty much succeeded in. Um, and again, accountability, responsibility, which should come as a priority, should be, I think, the first step towards change. So they should probably make sure they should ensure that the deaths that have happened, the paper leaks that have happened, the students that have been forced to fail because of the marking system errors and glitches, all of this should not happen again. Definitely should not happen again because it's not a great outcome from what they've done.
Um, that's all from Econ Unplugged. Plug back in with us next time. Bye.
Bye.